Everyone could mute themselves if you're not speaking, that would be helpful. That way we get a better recording.
Are you ready, Suzanne?
Yes.
All right. So welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tracy with the Montana State Library. I will be helping Suzanne with this webinar today. Please don't hesitate to put your messages in the chat if you have questions or comments as Suzanne is going through this session about planning for digital equity. We are recording it, so it will be available later on. If you haven't already done so, it looks like most of you have done a great job of this. It's always really helpful if you can just make sure and rename yourself with your full name, and if you're comfortable with it, what library you are from. That always is nice for us to just be able to see who's attending the webinar. So Suzanne Reymer is a statewide consulting librarian for the Montana State Library. She has always been very interested in technology and its power to help improve people's lives. She has been working closely with our consultant, Kate McMahon, on some of the federal funding that's coming through for digital equity and digital opportunities. And in particular, we're in the first step, I would say, of planning for those services for libraries. And so she will be walking you through today some of the steps and some of the things you might want to think about if you are looking at creating a digital opportunities plan. So again, please feel free to use the chat. I will be monitoring that as we go through this, and we'll interrupt Suzanne as needed if you have any questions. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Thanks, Tracy. And while this was scheduled for an hour and a half, I think without Kate, I kind of doubt we're going to go that long, but we'll see how it goes. If you have lots of questions, perhaps we will. The learning objectives for today are to go over some of the benefits of conducting digital equity plans for your local libraries, and how we can coordinate with federal and state agencies that are involved in digital equity efforts, and talk a little bit about how you can create a digital equity plan for your local library. Now, I'll start off with a definition, and this one comes from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as IIJA. Digital equity is a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. So you can see how they all kind of tie in together. And as more and more things go digital, it is really important that people have access to these resources. Now, Kate has created this digital opportunity planning guide for public libraries, and it's available now. If you go back to the Aspen event, if you go back to the event for this particular webinar, it's under the resources, and there's a number of other things there too that Kate has developed, various planning resources, grants, that kind of thing. So I do suggest you go and look there. It's also linked from our website. If you've been to our website recently, you understand, you'll see that we're doing major revisions. And so this has been kind of a challenge as things move around. It's like, oh, where is it today? But when I checked today, you could find it under the under library development, directors, and more resources. I'll link direct to the guide there. And so hopefully you'll be able to download it and look at it. And if you have questions about it, contact Kate. Now, the basic components of digital equity in this planning is availability, first of all. Is there sufficient infrastructure and coverage to deliver reliable, high-speed wired or wireless broadband service and technology tools for learning Do households have devices to access the internet? Is it affordable? Can learners and families and caregivers pay for the total cost of maintaining reliable, high-speed broadband service and technology tools for learning? And adoption. Do learners and families and caregivers have the information, support, and skills to obtain regular, adequate access to reliable, high-speed broadband service and technology tools for learning? Now, I think you can see on this that a lot of this is geared towards more the ISP, the broadband provision side of this. How do libraries fit into this? Well, we can't get internet to people's homes. We can certainly make sure that it's available to them through libraries and perhaps through our Wi-Fi. So if they don't have it at home, they can come to the library, they can use our computers, they can get on our Wi-Fi. We definitely don't have any sorts of power over affordability. That's strictly up to the providers. And as far as the state's digital opportunity plan, they were relying a lot on the Affordable Care Act to, not the Affordable Care Act, that's Obamacare, the Affordable Connectivity Program. I love all these little acronyms and things to deal with the affordability. Unfortunately, if you've been following that, ACP, as that is commonly known, is running out of money this month. And as of the last time I looked, which was fairly recently, Congress hasn't done anything to reinstate that or to put any more money into it. So I'm not quite sure where affordability is going to go with this. The ISPs are very resistant to having price caps set on services. So we'll kind of see how that goes. Adoption, I think this is really where libraries can help, is that by having access to internet and also providing support to people who are learning how to use it, or who may have questions. And, we all have classes or do one-on-one help, that we can certainly help just about anyone who needs to use the internet for any of the services that we've looked at before, for government or civic or healthcare or anything like that. We can help them use and access and use the kinds of tools they need. And so you can see we're really important players in this.
And before you move on, Suzanne, I want to acknowledge Emily's comment on the chat. She mentioned something that I suspect a lot of people on this call have experienced, and that is the limitations for rural areas. A lot of branches or even libraries are limited to open hours due to budget constraints, and yet the town residents may not have any access to internet, or it may be too expensive for folks. And so then libraries are facing, like, how do they provide that service when they may be only open 20 hours per week, and how to find that balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. And some libraries, keep their Wi-Fi on even when they're closed. Of course, we know that there's problems sometimes with that. We don't necessarily want people hanging around when the library's closed. That can be difficult. And it's not even, it's not even great to have people sitting in parking lots or sitting in front of the library. And in the middle of winter, that's even less desirable. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge as to how to, and I think that's one of the things we've been doing a lot with the hotspots, and that's going to come up as we go to. It's like, we may not be able to be open, but we can offer you these devices that you can take with you, and you can have access at home. So that's been a really important contribution. We did a survey last year, and we asked libraries for some of the best practices as far as what they were offering, and these are the results we got back. That free Wi-Fi was one of the most popular. Public access computers. I didn't go through and check some of this. I notice we have hotspot lending, which brings up some interesting things in my mind, but I think we actually mean hotspot lending on this. Just goes to prove how these things don't always correct so well. Updating internal wiring and routers, that's something that we've been doing for a number of libraries. We also provide one-on-one technology assistance, and we have done some digital device lending. And then as far as things that libraries either wanted to expand or add, and one of the things I have a hard time with are the bars that come up when you deal with this. So I was trying to move it around, and unfortunately, I can't read what the first one is. Tracy, could you help me out with that one? Is that silly little Zoom bar is covering it?
Yes, so the top choice was complete digital equity plan.
Okay.
And the next one is digital skills and training.
Thank you. So, one of the top things people wanted help with was completing a digital equity plan. So this is what we're doing with you right here, is to get you started on working through this. And then adopting cybersecurity policies falls after that. Working with tech centers, assisting job seekers, providing info on affordable internet programs, online community resources, free digital downloads. And so you can see how that compares with things that they're already doing and things that they want to add on there. So these are all things that we've been looking at and working with. I mentioned before when we talked about the digital equity definition, the IIJA, and there's two basic programs under this. The first one is BEAD, and that one deals with broadband mostly, and it's infrastructure deployment and adoption programs. And that's the big one, 42.45 billion. And we're right smack in the middle of that right now. So Montana is currently starting to take applications from ISPs that want to, the idea is that they must provide service to all the unserved locations in Montana with the funding that they have, and as many underserved as they can. And in Montana, they think that they're not going to be able to do that with the funding that they have. But like I say, they're right smack in the middle of this. As you can imagine, this is a big, big project. They've had to try to identify what all the unserved and underserved places are, and now they're trying to figure out how they can get service to those.
And Suzanne, just real quick, do they have a place where they've listed communities that are unserved or underserved so libraries could go see if there are communities on the list, or is that still a work in progress?
There is a map.
Okay.
And if you're interested in looking at the map, you can do it. I believe it's accessible through the Connect Montana website. So it's connectmt.mt.gov. And, if people are interested in that, I can find a link and get that to them. But I think, yeah, I think as far as the unserved, and, this, we could get into a whole lot of detail on this, but unserved is, I believe, people who aren't getting 25 download, 3 upload. Underserved are households that aren't getting 100 down, 25 up in the definitions. And the maps are pretty they're pretty detailed. Whether or not it's actually true or not, I don't know. But there's been a whole lot of controversy about that. The one that we're more interested in is the Digital Equity Act, which is provides $2.75 billion, and it's designed to establish 3 different grant programs that will promote digital equity and inclusion. And so the idea is that everyone will have the skills, technology, and capacity to use the broadband that they're providing through BEAD. So these should work hand in hand. This is Kate's little addition here. She said, this stuff can be pretty dry. So, a moment of whimsy of, yes, looks like everyone is online. They're not. I told her when I looked at this, I had a flashback to The Birds, which was the Alfred Hitchcock movie that every time I see birds lined up on a line, I'm kind of convinced they're going to swoop down and kill me. But take it as you will. A brief interlude and break. Breathe. We're getting on. As to who the Digital Equity Act is actually targeting, they have what they call target populations. And so these are low-income households, aging populations, veterans, people with disabilities, rural inhabitants, people with language barriers. That can be either, English is not their strong point, or low literacy, racial and ethnic minorities, and incarcerated individuals. And so, I think when you look at this, you can see these are quite often the people that libraries are serving as well. Particularly Montana, rural inhabitants, that's us. We've got lots of those. But, we're also an aging population. So, we do serve a lot of these folks.
I'm going to jump in again, Suzanne. I was trying to find that map, but it wasn't coming up easily, so I missed a couple of questions. Caroline asked, is the DEA funding that you listed on the screen, is that limited to Montana or all 50 states?
That dollar amount that I put in there is all 50 states. And it's,
go ahead.
I'll go into a little bit more detail on that with this slide, but go on.
Okay. And then Michelle mentioned that in Ronan, the biggest problem is people not having internet consistently. They don't have devices, or they have low quality devices that no longer can even carry out basic functions. She says the hotspots work fine, but they are too easy to steal, making the rules surrounding them strict and tedious.
Yeah, I know. And
sorry, that's Caleb, not Michelle.
And we'll get into some more of that too as we go along and look at some of the things that they're looking at as possibilities for libraries. It's like, okay, but hopefully we'll have some time for discussion as we get towards the end, and we can talk about some of the ins and outs of this.
All right.
In a little bit more detail about the Digital Equity Act and its grants, it's broken into 3 different segments. The first is the State Digital Equity Planning Grant. And so those were given out to states already to come up with their plans. And so I think that's all done, period. Montana got $600,000 for theirs. They finished and submitted theirs in, I think it was early February. It's been accepted. So we're now moving into the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant section, which they just put out the notice of funding opportunity for that at the end of March. I loved the timing on that. It came out Friday afternoon, right before Easter. So it's like, I happen to be working in online, so I got to see it and get on right away and look at it. That is for the states to apply for these digital equity capacity grants. So Montana's Connect Montana, our state digital office will be submitting an application, which is due the end of May for this grant. I believe it's about 60. I told Janet, I believe it's about 67 million. I mean, anyway, it's a, maybe it's not 60. Anyway, it's a pretty significant amount of money, and it's here. I'll get the details for anybody who's interested in the details. I'm not a numbers person, so it's great to put me with these things. But anyway, so they are putting together the application most likely as we speak, and we will see it eventually. Next is the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program, and that will be opening up in September, and anyone can apply for that. It is a competitive grant. Be forewarned on that one. It's going to be nationwide. So if you're even thinking about applying for that, most likely you will want to group together with other folks, other libraries, with your community, with nonprofits, because it is a federal grant program with fairly onerous reporting requirements. So it's not for the faint of heart. We'll put it that way. Now, as part of the notice of funding opportunities, part of the NOFO, they talked about what would be allowable under the capacity grant. And so you can see there's a lot of things in here that fall in the line of libraries. Digital literacy and skills training. Okay, that's stuff we do. E-government and civic engagement. That's stuff we could be doing. Device deployment programs. I love the language they use for some of this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that we were talking about. Both loaning, doesn't necessarily have to be loaned out. I imagine, you can make them available within the libraries, but, getting people access to devices that they need to access the internet. Economic development. This is some stuff we do and we can do more of. Online access to health and mental wellness services. I think online health is big all the time. And I think this is something I would be looking at a lot, is to try to see if my library could find a space and some resources to help with this. And we can talk about that if people are interested a little bit further down the line too. Online accessibility, basically it's making sure that your websites are accessible, trying to make it easy for people to access the library, to access the computers. We were talking about people with disabilities, just making sure that they can use the resources. And once again, the access to affordable broadband services, in this case, it's just promoting programs. So if you hear about programs, letting people know about them. This, as I mentioned before, is the state's digital opportunity plan. It is posted online at Connect Montana. So if you want to take a look at it, it's there. I've read through it. Exciting reading, but you can see what their plan was. And interestingly enough, they still call it a draft because they say they want to be able to change it. So we'll see what kind of changes are down the road, but it gives you an idea as to where they're headed. So we've broken a few things out of here that might help you, things that Kate has read through, so you don't have to. Now, we talked a little bit before about some of the definitions. So, we're talking about libraries serving fewer than 50,000 people. Now, the And you can see that 98% of our libraries that serve communities like that report broadband speeds below 100 megabits, which is, that was the FCC's target speed for libraries. They've now moved that to 1 gigabyte symmetrical. So they think all libraries should have that service. So keep that in mind as you're planning for your future internet needs. If you're not at 100, you're way behind the times and you should be heading towards 1 gig. And even if we have had sufficient internet, we've had problems with having sufficient and up-to-date wiring to take advantage of it. So we've been working on that with an internal wiring project. And also we rank 44th in high-speed internet adoption, 67% subscribe to, they're talking about terrestrial broadband, including cable, fiber optic, or DSL, which means that 33% don't, which is a fairly high percentage, and they're trying to increase that. So what can libraries do? I said this was going to come up again. It does. Invest in additional hotspots and other internet capable devices, laptops, tablets, and implement lending programs. And also expand device access points. I'm not quite sure what we mean about device access points, but I think the wireless access points are important in this, certainly. And that's one thing libraries have been doing too, is kind of expanding out their Wi-Fi so it reaches outside the library, and perhaps sharing that with buildings or folks that are nearby. But yeah, this is where we're needed, and we need to figure out how to do this so it won't make us all crazy.
And kind of related to that, Suzanne, is something I have heard other library directors say, as Emily mentions, that another wrench is the fact that a number of the people who would benefit from this kind of access and help do not want anything to do with the internet. A catch-22 for us, for sure. And it sounds like a couple of other directors are agreeing that the lack of adoption might be just not wanting to have access to the internet.
Yeah, and I've thought of that too. We're talking about the unserved. Some of them don't want to be served. They're unserved for a reason, and they're perfectly happy with that. Yeah.
Yes, and a couple of the directors on the call have mentioned suspending the hotspot lending program just due to all of the problems surrounding management and theft and abuse, I think, of the system.
Yep. So I think part of this also, goes into training, certainly. And, so we're getting out of kind of availability, and I talked before, the idea of adoption is making people comfortable, getting them the skills they need. So, and I think a lot of that does have to do with finding partners. And that can be other agency partners. And I think as part of the digital opportunity plan, they were talking about agency partners. And I think the state library should certainly be one of those. And hopefully they're looking at us in that respect. One never knows. But then they do mention us in here, partner with other state agencies, for example, the Montana State Library, Montana School for the Deaf and Blind, to design and deploy new tailored digital skills training programs. And, we have been doing some of this at the state library too, through our tiny tech training and that kind of thing. So, we're trying to help out. Well, we've been tailoring ours more towards library staff, because I think that's the first step, is to make sure that library staff have the skills they need. But then also, then how can we make sure that the people coming in can have the skills that they need to allow, in this case, to access telehealth and then other basic services. So one of the things that we've talked about a lot is digital navigators as a program. I think that's something that could be helpful to a number of us, having some trained people who are part of the community, who can help people utilize websites and various devices to, basically do what they need to do online and learn how to do it.
I have kind of a question about that, Suzanne, related to some of the comments in chat. Do those digital navigators also help? Cherie kind of mentioned, well, maybe what we need to do is help with outreach, promotion, and education that kind of inspires people to want to be connected. Do the digital navigators help with that? Or are they just focused on people who are like, I already get the value, I just need help, navigating the internet and the tools?
Well, from what I understand of digital navigator programs, they're pretty much specifically helping people develop the skills they need to use the internet.
Okay.
Now, outreach could certainly be another program
Okay.
that could be set up and funded through some of these funds, I would think.
Okay. So it's like kind of two different things. And then Caleb kind of mentioned that they have seen a lot of the kind of their older adult users where they're struggling because they don't intuitively get how to use the device, but then they also are having problems with scamming and such as that. And then Cherie talks about the challenge of the availability piece too, which I know you have talked often about how all of this is related, the affordability, the availability, and the adoption. And that's what makes it so challenging to provide this kind of service and support.
And I think the scamming kind of fits into cybersecurity, which is something that we've just kind of danced around a bit, but how to be safe online.
Yes.
And and while scams can occur without being on the internet, they certainly do them by phone and such as well. But teaching people to be a little bit more internet savvy about what they click on, and not responding to emails that look a little dodgy. And those of us who have to go through these cybersecurity trainings all the time, get a little bit jaded by it. But these are important things to go through and learn. And so having some of those programs available for people, and just kind of putting that information out in little bites that can help people become more savvy about that kind of thing could definitely be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know you have more to cover, but I'm almost wondering if it's worth a conversation at the end about our people's perspective, that we should be trying to focus on those who are reluctant to adopt the technology, or people who don't have the skills. Starla mentions that, she's been doing a lot of one-on-one and hand-holding and house calls, trying to get people to kind of feel more comfortable with the technology. And it looks like Nikki in Plains has kind of seen a lot of the same experiences as others with the scamming. And so perhaps there's some themes coming out of this session about what we might want to do if we were to try and go for a capacity grant.
I think so. I think there's some good themes coming out of there. Now, one of the things Kate put together is that digital opportunities planning guide. And within that is a plan template for public libraries. So she will put together some of the info for you, like some of the background information, community profile. She said, she's perfectly happy to go in, and we've had a couple of really great programs recently on how to use census info. So, if you want to dive in there and figure that stuff out yourself, by all means, do it. If you'd rather have her do it, she's perfectly willing to do that for you, because, she knows her way around really well, and, she can get in there and pull that stuff out. But a lot of the stuff is in there. So there's, census profiles on your community. There's information on, the broadband services and adoption. Now, what you need to do as part of the template is to fill in the information about your individual library. So some information about your service area, your facilities, what kinds of programs that you're currently offering, what you'd like to offer, perhaps some of your staffing and training needs. If you haven't done it already, it's a good opportunity to do some community engagement, whether it's doing some surveys or focus groups, talking to community groups and meetings, going out there and finding out just kinds of what things that they see as needs. And then you can put together some goals and objectives around availability, affordability, and adoption, and an implementation plan, including action plan and timetable, and perhaps start looking at some funding resources and potential partners for this. And the idea is, the more you have down as far as a concrete plan, the better ready you are to take advantage of what might be coming our way. And we're still in the not quite sure what's going on with this. We're still kind of flying blind. But assuming that there will be this application coming from the state, and that there will be money available, and the state library is looking at how we can help facilitate this, whether we can step in and be a sub-grantee for the state. And so, maybe we can take on some of the paperwork and record keeping on this, but it would really help us, and it would certainly be helpful to the state if you were to kind of work with them directly to have a lot of this stuff lined out, because it makes it a lot easier putting together the grant, reporting on the grant, and just getting ready for it. So this is basically what we're encouraging you to do at this point. And we've already gone ahead and we've done a little bit of work with Roosevelt County. And so, Kate went in and pulled some of this information from the census. And so, this was just on computer and internet use. You could see who has, computing devices, what kinds of devices they have. And so all of this is already being collected and available. And so, when we were talking about that, where does the library step in to kind of help with the need for devices? This helps give you some kind of idea as to what the needs might be. Are there any questions on this at this point? this will all be helpful once you actually, go ahead and download the planning guide and have a look at it.
Sheree had asked about, is there a survey template? And there is, so I'm letting her know what pages of the digital planning guide it is on.
One of the
But-
nice things is Kate is really thorough with these
Oh,
things.
she is, yes. And I will just paste the link to the guide back in the chat as well. But specific answer to your question, Sheree, is pages 18 and 19 of the guide. But at this point, I don't see any other questions, but please don't hesitate to post them in chat if you have other questions for Suzanne.
Okay. Then the kinds of things that you will need to fill in on this is some of the information from your library. So, and I think we changed some of this information when we were actually using it. It didn't get changed in the guide, unfortunately, but we can help you translate some of this. But so as far as public access computers, the number is really easy. Usage data, I think I translated that to like average number of users, like how many people do you generally have on at the same time. Same thing with the Wi-Fi, so just kind of a guess, because you want to get an idea as to like when you're busy, how many people are on there, because it makes a difference as far as how far your internet goes and how well it works. The staff computers, that one's pretty easy. When was your router and wiring last replaced? How recent was that? And then of course the broadband connection is always important. What's your provider? We're talking about download, upload speeds. I'd go with advertised. We're not going to make you do speed tests on this. This is just what do they tell you that you're getting? We all know that can differ a lot between what you're actually receiving, but gives you an idea as to where you're at in that. And then what kind of connection type do you have? Because if you don't know some of these things, you really should. So if it takes getting in contact with them to find out, it's worth it to find out, because for one thing, it makes a big difference as far as how much you can improve. If you've got fiber, you can probably, in theory anyway, improve up to like a gig or more. If it all has to do with money. If you're still on DSL, you're going to top out probably under 100, because those are old phone lines. They just don't have the capacity. Another possibility in there is cable. So, if you're on cable. And then wireless, I know this confuses some folks because, you have wireless in the library, but what we're really talking about with this is it could be either, if you're on a satellite, although I'd be curious to know if you're on a satellite, but we can tell, if you say you're Starlink, then you're probably on satellite. Some folks are on fixed wireless, which is a little bit different. But anyway, like I say, if you don't know, find out. And then participate in E-rate. Do you, yes or no? Are you willing to consider it? Once again, that probably makes a big difference on how far you can improve. If you're not willing to participate in E-rate, you're probably not going to get to that gig that you should get to as far as NTIA is concerned.
And Suzanne, I know you will be glad to answer this question. What is E-rate?
Yes, I will be happy to answer this question. E-rate is a federal discount program. It's monitored by the Universal Services Administrative Corporation, and it provides discounts to schools and libraries, pretty much now just on internet connections and on various equipment and support, kind of internet support, maintenance kinds of things related to internet connections. But it can, depending on your poverty rate in your area, it can provide up to like 90% discounts. So if you're in a high poverty area, it may mean that you only have to pay 10% of your bill if you go through E-rate. That's the good side. Bad side is it's a relatively complicated program. And it requires filtering. So for some folks, it's like, nope, we'll never consider it because of that. I happen to think the filtering requirements now are not nearly as onerous as they once were. So I personally would not let that stop me. I would figure out a way to work around the filtering, but that's just me. But yeah, it is out there, and it can make a huge difference in the kind of services that you can provide to your library and be able to afford. So I think that's what's important. Okay, moving on. Now it's time for Janet. Janet, are you still with us?
Yep, I am.
Yay. We had we wanted to try out the toolkit with a real library. And so Janet kindly stepped up on behalf of Roosevelt County Library. And one of the reasons that she got selected is because I'd been working with them on their strategic plan. And I happened to notice technology stuff coming up. And so it's like, oh, okay, Janet, will you play with us? And so she agreed. I like people who are agreeable to this. And she also agreed to take part in this webinar to offer like a little real life perspective on this. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And now for our perfectly spontaneous questions. So what did you learn during the strategic planning process that led you to digital equity planning, besides my kind of twisting your arm a little bit?
A little bit. Actually, I think it just really shows where the needs are of the people and what services you're lacking in that maybe people would like you to have. We've had people come in and say, can't we get more computers in here, so that, especially when one goes down, it's like there's only 3 left, and they don't like it when we have a computer down. So
and I'll add that when we were doing this and we were doing surveys, we discovered that the top Janet did a lot of surveying as part of the strategic planning process, and the top service that people liked from the library was checking out books, which yay, that's good, that's what we do. But the second one was computer usage, so that was really important to people. So like she said, if there's a computer down, people are upset because it's really important to them in the communities they serve. And she's got a bunch of libraries and a bunch of communities, so
yeah.
So next question. How do you think you might be able to use digital equity funds to help meet the goals in your plan?
Well, I think possibly maybe we could add another computer or 2. We could maybe purchase some hotspots. Right now we had 7 and we're down to 3 because of theft and damage and things like that. And maybe even we could purchase, maybe a tablet or 2 And I don't know if we'd want them for checkout. Maybe we could, but also for people who aren't really familiar with them, so we could demonstrate, they could sit and play with them. And if we did have them, so we could check them out, if they wanted to take it home and play with it for, you know, a week or whatever, then that would be available, because right now that's not really something that's in the budget to be able to do.
Okay, thanks. And finally, did you learn anything new from meeting with Kate and going through the worksheets?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. I don't remember right off what it was, but I'm very impressed with Kate and what she shared. And I haven't had a chance to get through the planning guide, the digital opportunity planning guide yet. I haven't got all the way through it, but the information that she gave me about our specific area, between the census and putting together the survey results, breaking it down into numbers was big. It was huge for me. It showed me that, oh, I'm at a loss for words. Anyway, it showed me where we can work on things to make things better for the patrons. And kind of shows maybe where, you know, our problems are, that we can work with community members and see if we can, you know, work together, collaborate together, and hopefully, even if it's only a small increase in help, the possibility is there.
Yeah, thank you. And for those of you who don't know, in Roosevelt County, you know, there's the main library that's in the picture in Wolf Point. And then there's two branches in Freud and Culbertson. And they also work with the college library at Fort Peck as an affiliate in Poplar. So so it's also kind of a challenge, you know, both in doing planning and in trying to do digital planning and in getting input and working with all these different libraries and different communities to try to put it together. So, you know, it's still a work in progress, but I think it'll be good. And we're trying to work separately a little bit with Lori at Fort Peck too, to maybe, you know, because there are separate tribal funds available as well, and maybe kind of steer her into being able to take advantage of some of that as well. So but I think it was a good experience to go through it with a real library and kind of see how this works out and what some of the challenges are. So
Yeah,
thanks,
it
Janet.
was pretty good learning experience. And because we do have 3 other libraries in our county, it just shows what things that we have that are very, very similar, and where we are not similar at all, especially with issues that we might have, but they may not have in Culbertson. It was very helpful.
And we'll find out around the state that, you know, we have different issues. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. So like we said, Kate will be available for technical assistance. And there are info guides, you know, there is this toolkit available. And also she put together a number of info guides that I also posted to the event website, or to the Aspen event, that have to do with funding and best practices and disaster planning, and a lot of those kinds of things that, you know, might be useful for you to look at and or copy and download. There will be more webinars in the future. For example, when we find out what the state's application for the digital equity capacity grants actually looks like. You know, we'll be in contact with you again, so you know, we'll have more information at that point. She's available for one-on-one consultations, for general grant readiness. If you're interested in applying for, you know, numerous other grants, as well as digital equity plans, for help with the digital equity plan templates. She won't be at MLA, as I stated to some of the people, because of family concerns and issues. But she might be able to make it to the remaining 2 Federation meetings. We'll have to see how that goes, and some other ones. And the information, you know, will be available at Montana State Library website in various places. So stay tuned. And here is both my contact information and Kate's. You can always feel free to email her at this address, and any other questions or discussions you might want to bring up at this point.
So, Starla had asked, is it time for a technology petting zoo? And I think this was in reference to Janet mentioning, should I purchase some tablets or devices that people could use in the library? For those of you who might be newer, there was a time when the state library had a technology petting zoo that had a variety of different devices that were new back then, you know, iPads, some MP3 players that libraries could check out and allow their patrons to kind of learn how to use and play with. And then I also want, while I'm reading Starla's comments, Starla mentioned using a consultant to help with filing with E-rate. And Starla, I wondered if you'd be willing to share that information if anyone else might like to explore E-rate, since it can really help reduce your cost. And then Caleb asked, how does everyone else handle multi-factor authentication for library staff accounts? Okay.
Some good questions. And
Yes.
thanks, Starla. I've already been referring people to you.
I do not. Caleb asks, and you may know, Suzanne, I do not. Could we get you bikies for people as a program or
Oh,
grant?
YubiKeys.
YubiKeys. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
So what is that?
I happen to have a couple right here. They're little devices. I don't know if they'll show up on camera. You know, like it's a little key. But they come in different shapes and sizes and stuff, and basically you set it up with some kind of information. Problem with mine is I think most of them are fingerprint sensitive, so you know they're activated by my fingerprint, so that would be difficult to share among people. But anyway, you use it as a multi-factor authentication thing. So you know you plug it into your laptop or your phone or whatever when it needs another authentication thing, and activate it however you activate it, and then it logs you into it. Yeah, I would recommend not getting those that are fingerprint authenticated.
That makes sense.
And then make sure you don't lose it. Actually, you know, it's a good idea if you're going to use YubiKeys to have, well, the problem with authentication things is they're only as good as the weakest link you have in there. And so you can do multiple ones, and then, you know, keep one locked in a secure place, so in case you lose your main one, you have a backup on them. Or I have a backup of Google Authenticator, which I think is a fairly reasonable one to keep. And Google Authenticator is on my phone, so if I lose my phone, I'm I'm in serious trouble. But
Yeah.
some people, use their backup as like a text or something like that, and that's not terribly secure. This can be broken. Yeah, multi-factor authentication, always fun.
Mhm.
At the state library, we use these little dongles, and I lost mine the other day and was in serious trouble until I found it again.
Does anyone have any questions for Suzanne?
Yeah, basically, I would recommend going ahead and looking at the resources. Look at the planning guide that Kate put together. If you have questions, you can ask me. You can email Kate, certainly. Especially email Kate if you're interested in working with her on that. Let her know, and she'll be happy to work with you and help you out with that. If you have general questions about the process and there's more you want to know about it, I can probably fake it as well as the next person, still operating in the dark on most of this stuff, and I can try to provide you with some information. But it's been a challenge as we go along and go, I wonder what this means. I wonder when we'll find out more information. It's coming.
And I would say one thing that's really neat about Kate is she has experience being a planner and working with planning departments of cities and counties. And so she really tries hard to think about how to do things like this digital opportunities, digital equity planning in a way that helps your library in a variety of ways. So she doesn't just focus on the sole purpose. She's actually trying to think about how to help your library overall and how to get the funds to actually do the work, which is really, it's a very cool thing about Kate. I really appreciate that about her.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
she's been working with this kind of stuff for a long time, so she really knows her stuff.
yes. And then Caleb mentions Edward Lindquist at the Missoula Public Library, that he has great info on security threats and how to get set up with different tools to check your network.
Good to know.
And Caroline shared his contact information if anyone would like to reach out to him about kind of the security aspect of it.
I think that's one of the things that that is one of the things that's emphasized in this is cybersecurity, and I think that is something that we're gonna have to work on trying to help people with and steering them in the right direction, because it's something we both need at the library level, and it's certainly something our patrons need to know about in ways that will be helpful and not overwhelming.
Starla posted the E-rate consultant's information that she uses in the chat. And some of the themes that I think, Suzanne, I heard from the chat and the questions people had is definitely helping people with the security piece. What to do about reluctant adopters of the internet, and whether we should do something with outreach or educational efforts. I think the digital skills and helping people just learn how to better use the internet, and kind of the gap between people not having the skills and yet not being willing to maybe take the tech training that libraries are offering, and kind of how to address that. And then people also mentioned the devices and technology petting zoo idea and the hotspots, but totally recognize that all of those things are problematic. However, they do see how it helps people get access. So those were just some of the themes that I noticed, and we can share those with Kate.
Yeah, good. And I'll try to make a copy of chat and keep that. And so, we'll have that accessible as well. So Well, thank you, everyone. And this is being recorded. I do believe.
Yes, I did hit the
And-
record.
And it will be posted to YouTube. Colette is really fast and fast with that. So, you can go back and look at it that way, and yeah, at your leisure,
Thank you,
or
Suzanne.
or let other people know.
Thanks for stepping in, Suzanne, and filling in for Kate.
And thank you all. So I think we could probably stop the recording,
Yeah. But
and I can stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has anything that they